Hi, it's Nick Astor. I'm here at the Wall Street Journal's 2014 Economics Conference in Santa Barbara, California. I'm here with Nic Delaye. He is PwC's Director of Sustainable Business Practice down in San Jose, primarily working with the tech companies down there. Yeah. And Nick, you just led a roundtable discussion here where we were talking about showing the value of sustainable practices or sustainability initiatives to shareholders. And we talk a lot about engaging stakeholders in the more general terminology, but at the end of the day, that old school shareholder value ought to be shown. So how do you do it?
Well,
that's a simple question, right?
Simple question, complex answer. So I would say maybe the first thing I would say is who's actually asking for shareholder value or impact on shareholder value of sustainability initiative to be measured. So if you think about it, companies have been, as we know, investing in sustainability initiatives for a while, and increasingly so, whether it's environmental initiative, whether it's their foundation, whether it's a variety of social initiative, employee engagement, and so forth. And this costs money, right? And so, and it's usually there's not enough transparency on how much money is being spent, let alone how much transparency on how much return there is on these investments. And the challenge is sometimes these investments can have a tangible impact, like you do eco-efficiency, you save money on electricity, on fuel, and so forth. But a number of times these sustainability initiatives have impacts that are much harder to quantify in dollar terms, and they're much more uncertain. So, for example, we know that millennials, for example, would prefer working for a company that shares the same value as theirs. But how do you actually quantify that? So if a company decides to implement a campaign, or that, for example, to increase the number of hours, volunteer hours that they allow their employees to do, presumably that will have an impact, a positive impact on talent attraction and retention. But how do you quantify that? Diversity is another example. So often we see that given that some money is being spent and the return is unclear, we see questions coming from CFOs, as we'd expect. Well, how much return are we getting from these investments? CEOs, in some cases, investors that are wondering why so much money is being spent and what the return is. And there's been some stories in the press lately of investors that actually putting pressure on certain companies to not invest in sustainability unless there's a clear business case, which is a very interesting way of approaching shareholder activism, if you like. And in some cases, employees as well are wondering what the impact is on all these investment that companies is making. So we see various drivers to start measuring in dollar terms the impact on shareholder value of all these sustainability initiatives.
So the question is being asked from all over the place, right? We've got some from the top. We've got guys that keep the books. They're wanting to see some value. We've probably got the shareholders themselves. You mentioned employees and even potential employees and so on, and people like that. But how do you actually measure it? Some of these things are kind of esoteric. Employee volunteer program or something like that, or some kind of, and energy is probably the easy one, but some of these other ones, how do you actually go out and figure that out?
So we partner with our team of valuation experts. So I'm in the sustainability practice, as you say. So we help companies do well by doing good. That's essentially what we do. But for the measurement piece, we have a team of people who specialize in valuing issues that are complex to value. And these techniques the techniques they're using have been in play for 30 years and have been used in non-sustainability contexts, in advertising context, for example. How do you measure the return on an advertising campaign, or by utilities who want to measure the impact of certain policy options or campaign options on their brand and so forth. So these techniques have been in play for a while. To keep it simple, and I'm not an expert in the whole mechanics, but I've worked on a variety of projects. The first thing to do is to decompose value into components, right? So you look at how the various value components that could be impacted by a particular sustainability initiative. So usually you would have the direct benefits, which would be the cost avoidance, cost saving, revenue increase, and so forth. And then you have all the indirect, and that's where you can get into employee engagement, brand, in some cases net promoter score or NPS, which is a measure of, I guess, of reputation with customers, and there's customer loyalty and so forth. And that value tree, if you like, is very specific to each company. So that's the first piece. And then the key piece is to decompose each of these into smaller bits that you can measure, and so you get into the KPI. So, so let's speak, let's speak employee engagement. So we would understand how the company currently measures employee engagement, and some companies do have a variety of measures, and we would look at how any given sustainability initiative would influence employee engagement. But we start from the way they measure employee engagement now. So we would say, well, if you were to provide people say an extra day of paid volunteering, for example, versus giving them rewards for healthy behaviors. Right? These are two separate employee engagements. How would these impact your current KPI, the way you're currently measuring employee engagement? And then what we do is we look at where moving the needle matters the most. And there's some, and that's why I won't bore you with the detail. But we would say, well, if you move the needle on the volunteer hours, that won't change your employee engagement metric by too much. But if you move the needle on provide people $100 extra for a reward for healthy behaviors, then it would significantly impact. So that's where you can start looking at to really what moved the needle and do trade-offs. Start looking at trade-offs where that initiative would work better than that one. And so you get into really company-specific KPIs. And from that point, there are ways to equate these KPIs to shareholder value, which are pure valuation kind of techniques. It's a very high-level summary, but
yeah, that's good. It's good. Now, what about when you have? Do you encounter pressure, or the rhetorical you as a shareholder, when the payoff, so to speak, is long-term for any one of these kinds of projects? Are there shareholders out there saying, "Well, it sounds good, but I'm not in it for 20 years. I want my 2-year payoff, and so I'm not going to support this or that sustainability initiative." Is that a problem when it comes to making the case?
Yes, it is a problem, and there is a great degree of short-termism with shareholders, and which obviously translates into management. But we also see companies that are thinking more long-term. And by long-term, it doesn't have to be 20 years, but even thinking 3, 4, 5 years ahead. So it's in this era, 3 to 5 years is actually a lot of change can happen in 3 to 5 years. So we see companies that are thinking long-term being actually rewarded by the market, in particular by, say, pension funds, for example, that have to take a longer-term view, and even certain investors who think that management that manages risk properly and thinks long-term is better management. So there's a lot of studies that actually show a correlation between sustainability performer and stock market performer, and often the quality of management is one of the reasons why investors invest in these companies, and so the ability to think long-term contributes to that. And so from a valuation point of view, what's interesting is that we dollarize now, if you like, a future direct benefit. So let's take customer loyalty. So let's say that a company, I'm working for a tech company who's looking at the sustainability features of their products and how that impacts a customer revenue, right? So there's a direct way to measure that. So for example, do they receive more RFPs because of the Energy Star certification of the products and so forth? So that's the direct benefit. But there's a customer loyalty which doesn't really generate dollars now, but presumably customer loyalty over a certain number of years then increase revenue because customers renew their contracts and so forth. So with these valuation techniques, we can measure now the impact of customer loyalty, and the probability of that impact to turn into real money, if you like, in a certain amount of time. So it's probabilistic based.
Got it. So there's a lot of balancing going on there,
yes.
and speaking of balance, when it comes to balancing shareholder value with this greater idea of stakeholder value that we use, how do you walk that line? I mean, sometimes those things are quite aligned, but a lot of times, especially with long and short term, and sometimes for other reasons, there may be some potential conflicts there.
How much time do you have?
It's the The short answer.
The short answer,
yeah.
yes. So it's a great question, and the sustainability professionals, when they look at what they call material issues, look at the balance of, or issues that have a high likelihood of impact on shareholder value and stakeholder value. So shareholder being more inward and stakeholder being more outward. We also use techniques to dollarize the impact of a business on stakeholders, whether it's on communities and the environment and so forth.
Both negative and positive.
Negative and positive.
Yeah.
So we call it total impact measurement and management, and we have lots of papers and case studies on this. And so what we would do is we'd look at the impact of the environmental impacts of a business on society. So, for example, pollution actually costs money to society. It increases healthcare costs, it decreases property value costs because of acid rain, and so forth. Withdrawing water actually costs money to society because the price of water increases and so forth. We also look at social impact. It could be beneficial, positive and negative, on health, education, community cohesion, and so forth. We can dollarize all of that. We have people who know how to do that. We can look at fiscal impact, right? So not only the tax that companies pay, but also the tax that they enable, the tax that their employees pay, and so forth, which often will be more positive from the dollar point of view. And then economic impact, job creation, the use of local supplies and resources, and so forth. And a company can know whether the total impact on society is positive or negative. But they're not paying for any of it, right? That's externality. But just to conscious of time here, what we see, there's a big correlation between your external impact and the impact on shareholders. And so I'll give you just one example. Water, again, if you a company that uses a lot of water in a non-responsible way, you would have a negative cost to the region where you withdraw the water from. You're not paying for it, but at some point you will pay for it directly and will impact your shareholder value either through price increase or even backlash from the communities. You may reduce your chances of getting permits. You may get riots or community fighting. Yeah. And that these issues have already happened, and you would suffer from that from a shareholder value. So the two are, in my mind, very related, and we can dollarize both of these, but we're not there to the point, unfortunately, where companies would choose materiality based on the dollar impact on shareholder and dollar impact on stakeholder. That's the future.
Well, it's complicated stuff, and I hope that future is coming forward. Nic, thanks very much for your time.
No, thank you very much.